these times up there too.
Sure. Good morning. Now it's working. Good morning. I'm Dr. Gary Kaplan from the Virginia Mason Medical Center in Seattle, Washington. And it's a real pleasure to be here with my colleague, Jack Silversin from Amicus. Jack and I have worked together for many years. We're really thought partners and spend a lot of time sharing ideas, particularly around the engagement of physicians in large-scale change. And that's what we're going to focus on today. We think that this topic is critically important, both to implement change and perhaps even more importantly, to sustain change over long periods of time. And we will share our experiences, a construct or model that I think you'll find helpful, a framework. And I'll apologize in advance if this is repetitive for some of you, but we will start by my sharing some of our journey at Virginia Mason over the last 11 years. And through that journey, help to begin the conversation about the essentials for effectively moving forward and sustaining the important change that's necessary in our healthcare organizations around the world. Just by way of background, we are not a large multi-hospital system, but we are what I would call a medium-sized integrated delivery system. And when we say integrated delivery system, we mean primary care, specialty care, outpatient and ambulatory care, inpatient care in hospital, as well as the rehabilitation process post-hospitalization. Our roots at Virginia Mason are very much in the group practice of medicine. So our founders, 91 years ago, came from the Mayo Clinic and the University of Virginia, and they found their way to Seattle in the Pacific Northwest, part of the United States, and started the first group practice. So 8 doctors came together, and that was a very breakthrough innovation for that part of the country at that time. That actually our founders were called, and I think this is a compliment in many ways, they were called socialists and communists because they were actually going to work together collaboratively. And obviously the Mayo Clinic had just gotten started and group practice was in its infancy. Our founders built their own hospital and became a major referral center for the Pacific Northwest. And so we see lots of patients from Alaska, Montana, Idaho, other states that come to Seattle for specialty care. And over the past 20 years, we've built a large primary care delivery system in the metropolitan area as well. We have an academic mission. So patient care is first. We're not a university medical school, but we do teaching. We have about 120 residents in internal medicine, general surgery, radiology, anesthesiology. So we have an academic mission. We also have a basic science research institute that particularly focuses on autoimmune research. And then in recent years, the last 2 years, we've formed what we call the Virginia Mason Institute, which is an educational vehicle for training people from other organizations around the United States and from other countries as well. And we've had the pleasure of working with the Northeast region of the UK over the last 4 years as we've begun to share these ideas more broadly. So it's important to keep in mind the landscape in which we work. And I became, in the year 2000, the 7th CEO at that time, 80 years. So there have only been 7 of us, and each of us was a practicing physician. And I continue to practice internal medicine, although not as much as I used to. And this was the environment, this was the landscape we faced at that time that propelled us on this journey we've been on over the last 11 years. And unfortunately, it's still the landscape today. And you are all very knowledgeable about this. We have a defect rate in healthcare that is unacceptable, that if it was in any other industry with a 3 or 4% defect rate, it would have been eliminated a long time ago. If the airline industry had a 3% defect rate, none of us would get on airplanes to go home. And if you went out and bought a television set and 3 out of 100 did not work when you got them home, you wouldn't buy those television sets. So we have tolerated mediocrity, as Jim Easton described it this morning. We've tolerated a defect rate. And if it's you or me or a family member of ours, that is 100% defect if we have a medical error. We aren't interested in the other 97%. We're interested in what affects us. We know the cost of poor quality is enormous. There was one study in the United States that showed $9 billion from 6 preventable inpatient complications. 6 things we know how to avoid. Everyone in this room knows how to prevent, causing $9 billion of a cost that's unnecessary. We know the cost of health care is far too high. We know that access is an issue around the world, and particularly in the United States. I'm embarrassed that 50 million people in our country have no health insurance. And I'm envious of most of you and your healthcare systems that provide universal access. But perhaps the thing that frustrates me the most is what's happening to our healthcare workforce. What's happening to people, physicians my age in their 50s, who are retiring because it's not what we signed up for. And nurses, the average age of inpatient nurses in our community is 48. That's a workforce problem. And we're asking our best people to work in systems full of waste that are not reliable, that are more chaos than routine, and it's not sustainable, as we know. So that's the landscape. In the year 2000, when I became CEO, and it was in the backdrop of the IOM reports, which you're all familiar with, we said, well, this doesn't happen at Virginia Mason. As I'm sure many of you said in your organizations, this is somebody else that is where the defects are occurring, and then we realized that indeed it does happen in our own institutions everywhere. And so the backdrop of our change journey was this report and this environment as we move forward. So we began, and you'll hear more about this over the next 90 minutes, but we began a journey that was crystallized by a new strategic plan. It was clarified around patient-centeredness, patient at the top, and we were searching for a management method. In fact, I personally went to many academic institutions around the United States looking for a management system, and nobody in healthcare had a management system. And that's when we, from our friends at Boeing, came to learn about the Toyota production system and how that had been applied in aviation. And they explained what they were doing. They explained that actually Airbus was also engaged in lean manufacturing principles. And we started to read and learn about it. And we were really the first in healthcare to begin to explore this new way of thinking. And then in 2002, we went to Japan. The people at Boeing said, if you really are serious about this, you should go. And so we took our entire leadership team, not really the entire leadership, the entire executive team, 32 people, and we said, if you want to be a senior leader at Virginia Mason, you must come on this journey. And I didn't know what to expect. Really, I had been told this was important to do, and I'm not here to say if you want to follow this path, you need to go to Japan by any means. Although we've now taken 12 teams to Japan. This first trip was transformational for us. We were changed in the way we were changed in so many ways. We came home and believed that we had found a new way of managing, a new way of leading, and a new way of improvement. And we came home and we said, you know what? This is our management system. It speaks to us, and I'll tell you more why that's the case. But we said, you know what? We have to be willing to get out of our own skin. Be willing to say, yes, we work in healthcare. And healthcare is very important. And as we heard this morning, people let us into their lives at their most vulnerable and sensitive moments when caring, I think the words Jim Easton used, when caring and compassion are most needed. And what a privilege it is to work in healthcare. But we're not the only industry that deals with life and death. I remember before we went to Japan, one of our physicians stood up in a meeting room like this and said, you are taking us down the wrong path. We deal with life and death. We don't build airplanes. And we don't make automobiles. And then you realize that if a plane falls out of the sky, that's life and death. And if an automobile fails down, going down the freeway with a family, that's life and death. And we came to see that in healthcare we actually make things. We make office visits, we make surgical procedures, we make inpatient stays, we make laboratory tests. And when we think about things as in that fashion, we then begin to think about the processes that go into making things. And when you think about the processes that go into making things, you begin to see the opportunities for improvement, the opportunities to eliminate waste. And so we said, this will help us achieve our vision of being the quality leader. Now, what did we mean, though, when we said quality? And we said we'd better be very clear about what we mean when we talk about quality. And so this is for us what we call our Virginia Mason quality equation. Now, this is not rocket science, and most of you talk about these things. You may call it the value equation, outcomes over cost. But we said, you know, that denominator used to be a C for cost, but we think that if we just talk about taking out cost, sometimes quality will go down. But if we focus on taking out waste, this is what we learned from our visit to Toyota, that there is so much waste in everything we do. And in healthcare, we know that there's so much waste. If we focus on taking out waste, non-value added from the standpoint of the patient, not from the standpoint of the doctor or from the standpoint of the nurse or the technician, but from the standpoint of the patient, then we will actually reduce cost and improve quality. And we also said that A for appropriateness was critically important. We can do a great procedure. We can have a great outcome. We can do it efficiently with no waste. We can delight the patient and family with great service. But if the patient didn't need it to begin with, there's no quality. And so much of what we do adds no value. So we got clear about what we meant by quality. And we came home from that first trip and said, this is our management system. And that was a very important concept. Not our improvement system, not how we do process improvement, not how we do projects, not how we just improve quality, but our management system. And so today, we use what we call the Virginia Mason production system for strategic planning, for budgeting, for quality improvement. And it was really remarkable when we said, this is our management system. The first people that came into my office were the finance team. And they said, well, we're finance. We don't have to do this. And I said, wrong. And then it was the information systems team, the IT team. We are programmers. We write software. We don't have to do this. Wrong. Then it was the critical care doctors. We take care of really sick people. This is okay for primary care, but not for critical care. Wrong. And so as we thought of this as a management system, it helped us train 5,000 people on a single way of improvement and a single way of managing and leading. And it was because this spoke to us. It was just what we were looking for. It was all about the customer. It was relentlessly focused on quality and safety. The people closest to the work have the knowledge and using very specific tools, the abilities to improve the work. And we all know about the successful economic enterprise. These are the things we do, and I won't go into great detail about this. This is not a talk on lean or the Virginia Mason production system, but we understand our work with the current state value stream. Every area in our medical center is a value stream, current state. And they also have a future state, what they are trying to create. The RPIWs, the Rapid Process Improvement Workshops, 4.5-day events for improvement with changes and improvements put in place the next Monday morning. 5S, how we organize the workplace. 3P, how we build new buildings and facilities using these methods and tools. Standard work. I remember saying standard work, and the doctor said, that's standard mediocrity. That will stifle creativity and innovation. And in fact, the opposite is just the case. And in fact, our doctors today would say, we need more standard work. And then daily work life. How do we integrate these principles into everyday work? And just to show you, this is a management system, not a single area of focus. This is just some examples of the more than 750 workshops we've done now over the last 10 years in every area, whether it's the hospital or radiology or supply chain or research or education or care delivery. Not around the doctors, not around the care processes, but everything in the institution. I think that's critically important. Just a couple of quick examples. Primary care. I'm a primary care internal medicine physician. And my work when I was seeing patients full-time was batch mode. I would see my patients in the morning, and then I would do my dictation, my documentation at lunchtime, unless I didn't get to it, and then I would do it at the end of the day, unless I didn't get to it, and then I'd do it the next morning, and then if I didn't get to it. And pretty soon it didn't look anything like the visit. And so the primary care teams put together a new way of working, one-piece flow stations, where I come out of a room, do the documentation, return a message, urgent phone calls, and go back in the room. And today we have primary care doctors swimming and exercising at lunchtime and getting home for dinner with their families. Huge improvements in quality and in efficiency and in satisfaction. Another example in the hospital nursing units, where nurses, unfortunately, are spending way too much time doing things that they didn't go to nursing school to do, looking for things in the nurses station, doing report out, having meetings, and not enough time at the bedside. So our nurses said, we want to redesign nursing care in the hospital. And so they went from 68% in indirect care, not at the bedside, to now 90% at the bedside. Now they do handoffs and shift change and report out, all in front of the patient. It's the epitome of nothing about me without me, and the patient is engaged. And so now what happens is that the patients don't have to push the call light to call for the nurses, because the nurses are always there and always available. Our surgery areas, where we've improved throughput and turnover time, and I'm told now that our turnover case time is about 11 minutes, which is really efficient. The surgeons love it, the anesthesiologists love it, but most importantly, the patients love it. One of the most important things we saw when we went to Toyota that first time, and every time since, was what happens when the worker does not have what they need when they need it. This is the Prius assembly line. Every 60 seconds, a car enters this worker's workstation, passes through the workstation, he does what it is he does, and then it moves to the next worker. However, if the worker can't do what he's supposed to do, he pulls the cord and the line slows down. And if he still can't, do what he's supposed to do, he pulls the next cord and the line stops. Think about that. Every one of 350 workers in this factory can stop the factory. And we said in healthcare, what do? Retrospective quality assurance. A month later, right? How many of you have been retrospective quality assurance committees? I'm sure many of you. A month later, we go back, we find the problem, we fix the system. How many more people have we harmed? We said we want real-time quality assurance at Virginia Mason. So we came back and we said, we want this for our patients. Every staff member is a patient safety inspector. But if you pull the cord at Virginia Mason, we as leaders will commit 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to respond and decide, do we need to take a process or a person offline? What is the root cause? Real-time quality assurance, very powerful. And since that first trip, actually through this year, through January, we had 20,000 patient safety alerts. We wish it was 25,000 or 30,000, but we are making great progress. Our patient and staff satisfaction have improved tremendously over the last decade, and our economic performance has gone from breaking even to profitability. We don't exist to make money, but if we don't have a bottom line, we cannot invest in our people, in our processes, in continuing improvement. And so this has been quite a journey over the last 11 years. We've made great progress. And I think the question is, and as we reflect on this and as we go through this next hour, is how have we done this? How have we gotten there? And it's a pleasure. Jack Silversin will tell you how we've gotten there. Thank you.
And Gary will be back for much more. It's a pleasure to join Gary here and to share my job being really to think about what are the underlying principles of what we just saw. And as Gary said, as we've thought about what's been accomplished at Virginia Mason, we've developed kind of a framework which we hope will be useful for you all as you think about going back to your own organizations and applying some of the learning. By way of background, my wife and I have our own consulting company. It's not a part of Virginia Mason, our own company, and have had for nearly 30 years, working all in healthcare, and like to think of ourselves as kind of like applied anthropologists, working in organizations and particularly focused on physicians and change and how to help physicians become more effective leaders in bringing about change in organizations. As one of our clients once said, helping physicians move from the practicing alone together to really being able to function more collaboratively in the organization and thereby really bring about all of the kinds of benefits that they can when they do collaborate in a way that really adds the value. Well, so what we're really talking about here today is that if we're talking about transforming care, the engagement of our doctors is really not optional. They are absolutely pivotal. They bring expertise and a perspective and a commitment, which is essential. This is in no way lessening the importance of nurses and other staff. Absolutely all are critical. But my observation is often it's the doctors who can be the most challenging because I think in some ways, as we'll talk about, the work they're being asked to do in improvement may feel for them not exactly who they are. When Gary talked about this idea of standard work being associated with someone who is a professional, oftentimes it's kind of rejected out of hand. And so engaging doctors, at least in our experience, has been pretty challenging. Well, this is the framework that I promised. If we're going to talk about engaging doctors in transformation, we're going to talk about kind of two sides of a coin. The first side is going to be this improvement method, and Gary's talked just a wee bit around the Toyota production system, or as it's now the Virginia Mason production system, as it's been applied in healthcare. And if you see it says improvement method, and then it says in parentheses technical. These are a set of technical tools that, when appropriately applied, bring about remarkable benefits in terms of taking out waste and improving the safety of processes in healthcare. But what's below the line, then, is really targeted toward really addressing the human dimensions of change. And that's what we really are focusing on here in this session today. The engagement of doctors really means addressing the human dimensions of what we're asking them to do. And we're going to address this from the perspective of four different areas. First of all, that a critical mass has to feel urgency for change, and not just in an intellectual way, but in a deep way. Secondly, there has to be among the doctors a broad and deep commitment to a shared picture of what we're trying to accomplish together at some point in the future, and fairly specific and granular about what that's going to look like. Third, there has to be a kind of visible and committed leadership and management that I think, as we'll talk about, is different than, at least in our experience, not typical of what we see in healthcare organizations. And I'm speaking, given the limited time we have, particularly among the doctor leadership, what kind of leadership is required. And then finally, this notion of a new set of expectations. You see the word compact, and that will get defined in just a few minutes. But for now, let's say a new set of expectations between the doctors and the organization that are aligned with achieving this vision. Now, while this model really is reflective and I think very much supportive of what you're going to hear about from Virginia Mason today, at least in terms of where Mary Jane, my partner, and I have come from in terms of our role in helping to develop this, we've had the privilege of working certainly across the United States in a variety of settings, but also a great deal in the UK and in Canada. And so I think that at least in our experience, there's a lot to suggest this really works, at least across the developed world, and in ways that are pretty powerful. Now, before getting down into the model, there's just one kind of another framework I'd like to introduce. And this framework comes from, as you can see, a psychiatrist, actually, a doctor, Ronald Heifetz, who's full-time on the faculty now at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard. And he teaches leadership to mid-career executives from nonprofits all around the world. And to be provocative, I'll start with his bottom line. He says the most common cause of leadership failure is treating an adaptive problem with a technical fix. He didn't say technical fixes aren't important and aren't part of the solution, but we take an adaptive problem and we throw on a technical fix. What does he mean by that? Well, let me go to the first definition of what's the difference between technical and adaptive. He says there are two kinds of problems. The first he would call technical, and that's where we've got a very well-defined problem. There's a solution we can pull off the shelf, or someone can come in and tell us what to do, and it's pretty straightforward how to implement. It could be a lot of work, but it's pretty straightforward. I mean, maybe the simplest example is you're driving down the road, you get a flat tire, it's a problem you're familiar with, take out the manual, you pump the car up, you know what to do, and the implementation is very straightforward. But I submit that a lot of the challenges we're facing around transforming care are not so straightforward. I think they tend to fall under this notion of adaptive challenges, where the challenge is quite complex. And to solve or to address this challenge requires transforming long-standing habits and deeply held assumptions and values. And when we think about new ways of working applied to doctors, I think in many, many examples that I can think of, where it requires transforming long-standing habits and deeply held assumptions and values of how doctors are meant to work. So one of the things that immediately kind of jumps out at me is if we think about the training of most doctors where there's a true value on autonomy, do what's best for the patient in your judgment, and we put that up against, well, there's standard work. And when we have the application of a standard process or a standard way of doing something and it's been demonstrated and your patient falls within that category, you should do it the standard way. But that's very much transforming a long-standing habit and a value and a pride as a professional in doing things one's own way. To address an adaptive problem, it really involves feelings then of loss and sacrifice, sometimes even betrayal to professional values. And the solution requires learning a new way of thinking, new relationships. Maybe another way of putting that is the solution requires being incompetent for a while, whereas before you felt totally competent in you're kind of in the groove, so to speak, doing doctors practicing in the way that they feel quite successful. So I think, when you think about this idea, which is so straightforward and logical, about giving people a new method or a technical approach to improving health care, I think many of us wonder, why is there all this resistance coming from maybe others, but certainly from doctors in our experience? And I think that the answer for me is it's not about resistance. Or if you even think about what resistance is, it's defending the thing that you really think is important. And I think when you talk about the kinds of changes that are involved in taking on this new approach to providing care, it is largely adaptive. Now, when you think about those bubbles that I had across that diagram just a few minutes ago, those 4 bubbles at the bottom, they're all ways of really addressing the adaptive work that's really a part of then in helping doctors engage in the ultimate, which is the improvement work, the process improvement work, the application of the method. So don't get me wrong. This is not about sitting in a hot tub and thinking about, kind of how do you feel. All of that is a means to an end, so people engage in the tools. But I think many have found that if you don't adequately address this adaptive work, what you end up with is projects, but you don't end up with transformed organizations. And I think that's what we're all here to try to strive toward. But when you're dealing with adaptive change, just think about it. It involves not just changing minds, but hearts. It's risky to lead. When you're dealing with this kind of change, people get very frustrated. Their anxiety levels rise, and people look often for people to blame. And so those who are leading it can be kind of ostracized by those who are prior friendly colleagues. It does involve feelings of loss and sacrifice, as I said, sometimes betrayal. And it generates in individuals and in organizations often disequilibrium and distress. And the term that Heifetz uses, work avoidance. And when he says work avoidance, he doesn't mean laziness. What he really means is the anxiety is such that people don't want to go there. They avoid it like the plague. You know, it's the kind of thing that never quite makes it onto the agenda at the meeting. Or when you bring it up, there's some kind of behavior that suggests you really better not go there. This is just the way people are when you start to go to something which is very uncomfortable, really questioning, again, the very heart of how people practice medicine. Now, I think, again, it's not as if it's either or. When you think about a lot of the change that we're talking about, there are technical components. I want to emphasize that, and they are important. If you think about the computerized order entry system, for example, that I know many of you have, there are both technical and adaptive components to that. Surely there's technical and learning that pull down menus and how to apply the, kind of all of the aspects of the record to make it a value. But there's the adaptive aspects. Somebody now can keep track of where I am at all times. Somebody can evaluate how I'm treating individual patients, more accountability. There's the where do I put my eyes when I'm interviewing the patient when I've got this screen in front of me. And I certainly know that most of the failure in the implementation of computerized order entry or electronic medical records relates not so much to the inability to master the technical component, but it's the discomfort and the lack of familiarity and the lack of support to really master the adaptive side of the equation. So as you listened, as we go through these four bubbles with the remaining time we have, I want you to think about not just the what's in those bubbles, but how we approach each of those areas in the bubbles so that you work through, if you will, the adaptive dimensions of the change. Because one of the things that you'll see is one of the main ways of helping people through the adaptive change is engaging them in dialogue and conversation. It's as if the conversation were the therapy. By talking it through, you release yourselves of some of the old baggage and you start to create the new, which is very different than giving people the answer. So you'll see that applied as we go through it. Well, I just want to say a couple of words about the first bubble before I turn it back to Gary. The first bubble says critical mass feels urgency for change. Now, what do we mean by that? Well, John Cotter, who's an expert in organizational change from the business school at Harvard, and many of you are probably familiar with his work, says it all starts with urgency. He's got a big model with the 8 steps in change. But the urgency, he says, he's written a book just solely around that because he feels it's so often missed. We think we've made the case and then we move on. But he says if you move on before people really in their gut have a sense of urgency, we left them behind. Because, as he says in another book, he says people have lots of other things to be committed to. It's only the urgent few that they're going to devote their energy towards. So what do we mean by urgent? I love this quote. He says, when people have a true sense of urgency, they think that action on the critical issue is needed now, not eventually, not when it easily fits into a schedule. So think about the work that you're doing now. How urgent is it to move forward on this work? Is it something that one fits in, or is really the deck cleared and this is the work? And it's all within this context that I think people do or don't get the sense of it's urgent. So I don't want us to think that urgency is only like if we don't do this, we're failing tomorrow. That may or may not be the case. But if we don't do this, the consequences will be felt in a way that none of us are going to be happy about. Now, the question I often think is, when I go into an organization, the executive will tell me that it's urgent, and I go and talk to the doctors, and many of them may say, from their perspective, it's kind of a solution in search of a problem. All this quality improvement is a solution in search of a problem. They don't experience the problem. I go back to the chief executive, and I'd say, and I'd ask you to think this about yourself, what is it, if you're not sleeping well at night, what is it you know that the others don't know? And how do you get them to understand it in a way that's compelling? Because the bottom line in all of this is making what's invisible to those in the organization visible. And it's challenging sometimes because the things that cause a diminution in quality or cause accidents or poor outcomes oftentimes are not directly felt by those who may be contributing to those outcomes. Sometimes we're distant from it, and it makes it quite challenging. And I would just suggest around this making the invisible visible, sometimes it is about the cold, hard facts on performance and not dressing it up, but really putting it out there so people can see it. If you've got a group of people who are quite inspired and aspirational, I mean, sometimes people really think that they're doing better than they are. And I think sometimes it's really showing we aspire toward, but this is really where we are. I think showing people trends and what the implications of those trends are. And then I think people talking about the personal impact of when things don't go well. I mean, God forbid, but any clinician who has ever caused harm to a patient talking about what that experience was like is extraordinarily moving. So it's not just the facts, but it's the heartfelt, it's the emotions. Cotter talks about, it's not just about give the facts and people change. There's an element to that, but it's also people have to see and feel in their gut the impact of the current state before they change. And shining the light on that, and so that people can get that in the gut sense we need to go there, even though we don't have all the answers, is critical. Final thing I want to show you is this notion that, again, this comes from Heifetz's work, and I would just call your attention to the fact that there are two horizontal lines in green running across the slide, where it refers to that as the productive range of distress between those two lines. You see on the left-hand axis there, disequilibrium, or we might call that anxiety, and over time across the horizon. So the adaptive challenge rests within, if we're going to be effective at addressing it, rests within this productive range of distress. If we're below that productive range of distress, there's no sense of urgency. People are kind of sleeping. It's unimportant, and they go about their business as is. If it's above that limit of tolerance, if the anxiety level is too high and people short circuit and can't participate. And I think we've all experienced probably all three states. But as Heifetz says, we can't necessarily tell where people are. It's not like people walk around with a thermometer about how hot they're feeling at any given point in time. And so I think the advice he would give us is, this is really all about experimentation. If people are not engaging, then you've got to really try something. If you think the heat's too low, raise the heat. Show people the data. Demonstrate to them the impact of current performance. Help them understand what this will really mean for the future of their department or organization in a way that's relevant to them. And see what happens. If they start engaging and asking questions, that's a great thing. But if they start to really decompensate or stop even in coming to meetings or having conversation, then maybe we need to divide it up into smaller pieces and have some subgroups working on issues. How we go about this depends on people's reactions. But note, there must be a certain amount of distress for people to engage. And I think for many of us who are leaders, and particularly doctors leading doctors, the idea of contributing to distress is something which I think is often very alien to our ways of thinking. But I think as long as people go about their work in a way where they don't feel the impact of the current state, it's very difficult for them to engage in what is very challenging adaptive work. Gary's going to talk a little bit about this urgency question at Virginia Mason.
So as I look at this slide, it was not a skill set that I had as a leader and as a new CEO in the year 2000. In fact, I didn't know about turning up the heat and turning down the heat. But what I knew was that we were at a crossroads in our organization's history. When I became CEO in the year 2000, we had completed 2 years of significant economic losses. That was the first time in our history that we had actually lost money. Now, I was very much part of the leadership team in those years. I've been a leader at Virginia Mason for 25 years. And so my challenge was how to build on a strong foundation, how to be respectful of the past, and how to really lead significant change. Because it was clear that if we wanted to retain our best people, if we wanted to thrive going forward, be true to the vision and the values of our founders, we were going to have to change. And that was a huge challenge for us because we were very proud and we were very good. We just didn't realize that we weren't good enough. And so as we began to get in touch with that, We stood up in a room like this, I remember the day very vividly, and said to our organization's leaders, including 400 physicians who were in the room, we change or we die. And in some ways, that was a defining moment in the year 2000, because we had said, no longer are we going to cover up the challenges, no longer are we going to make nice and just help everyone feel good. We need to come face to face, as Jack said, shine the brightest light on the need to change. And it was very interesting. There were some people who, oh my God, what's the world coming to? But the vast majority were willing to speak the truth. And it was a moment that created tremendous urgency and began us on this journey. And so as leaders, we have to keep that very much in mind. It's okay, and not just okay, but necessary to tell the truth. It's necessary to take people out of their comfort zone. So we were actually, urgency is not something that you just say, okay, we feel urgency and it's maintained. And so we were on this journey for several years. Improvement, change, working. We discovered the Toyota production system and we were putting it in place very systematically. But, complacency, the pace of change. And then Mary Mcclinton came to Virginia Mason. And some of you know this story. But Mary came to us for a tertiary procedure, but one that we do every week at Virginia Mason. And we failed her. Mary died of a preventable medical error at Virginia Mason. And it was the darkest, saddest time in our organization's history. But as soon as we found out what happened, we went public. We told the public what had happened and why it had happened and how sorry we were that it had happened and our commitment to preventing this type of mistake from ever occurring again. It had not really been normal, and today we talk about apology and disclosure and how critical these things are. But back in 2004, we were only one of the first organizations that had made this decision. And our board, our community leaders, our public leaders said, this is essential. We have to tell the truth. And it was the right thing to do. What was challenging, though, was the media were relentless. They were very, very much in attack mode. And then I started to get emails from around the United States and from around the world. Reuters had picked it up in Europe and was sending it out, and I got emails from Europe. How can you have done this? How could you have killed a patient? All of these things. It was amazingly powerful and tragic, but it propelled us with more urgency than we'd ever had before. And in fact, just 2 weeks ago, we had our 6th annual Mary Mcclinton Patient Safety Award ceremony, where we were joined again by Mary Mcclinton's family. And we presented a team at Virginia Mason from many teams that had been nominated with the Patient Safety Award. But this year was special because Gerald Mcclinton, Mary's son, spoke for the first time. And he got up and he talked about his mother, and this is in a room full of people like this. People were crying, even now, 7 years later. And he told about his mother, and he told about their family. But he also told, and he talked about our work, but he also told about why this past year he made the decision to have surgery done at Virginia Mason and to have his knee replacement at Virginia Mason. And it was because he believed that we were serious about quality and safety. And what was so interesting was even out of that talk that he gave came urgency, came a renewed commitment. It's a constantly renewing commitment around safety and around quality. And so, in fact, as leaders, we don't want to manufacture urgency. We don't want to create urgency where none exists because people see through that immediately. But where there is the compelling case, the compelling urgency, we as leaders need to bring people's attention to that urgency, shine the brightest light. And today, how can we not feel urgency? In the United States, I feel urgency around healthcare reform, around reimbursement, around workforce morale, around competition, and most importantly, around the gap between how good we are today and how good we need to be for our patients and our community. Urgency is critically important to moving forward with transformation. Jack?
Great. I would just add, I think sometimes this urgency has to be discovered by people. It's not necessarily tying it all up and saying, there's the case. But I think with doctors, sometimes it's giving them some information and saying, so what do you think it all means? And helping them draw their own conclusions. That self-discovery can be very powerful. On to the next bubble, broad and deep commitment to a shared vision. Well, this diagram, I think, describes the state of shared vision in many organizations that certainly I get into, which is very committed people having high levels of activity, but it being malaligned or not aligned. People often working at cross purposes. In an organization like that, I'd say the shared vision is let's try to get out at 5 o'clock. But that's probably about as far as it goes. And surely they would like to provide good care to patients, but this is not about integration and coordination. That really comes from having a shared picture. And you might want to use the term shared picture or shared destination, if you will, to substitute for this notion of vision, which I think is sometimes a hackneyed expression. But what is it when we come into the institution every day, regardless of our specialty or role we play, that defines what we're trying to achieve as a picture in the future? That's the question. That's what we need to be aligned around. And as I say, broad and deep within the organization. When we think about this, achieving this with doctors, there are significant challenges. And the first one on the slide, I think, for me is the most important, which is we take doctors who I think are largely trained to think of themselves as independently responsible. And if I think of myself as independent in terms of what I produce as a result, as opposed to interdependent, then probably that notion of a shared vision isn't all that valuable. When I first started this work 30 years ago, if you asked doctors what was the shared vision, it would go something like, we have doctors here who are all good doctors and we all work hard. As long as we're all good and we all work hard, that's the vision and we'll be successful. Well, I think if we work independently, that's probably true. But in the level of complexity that exists today and the kind of care that's being provided around the world, there it's not just an independent endeavor. It's not like independently playing golf. It's much more of a team sport. And if we can acknowledge the interdependence, then the need for shared vision, I think, rises in people's sense of priorities. Where we've had these kind of work done before, it's often very superficial, and it's more of a kind of a jingle, if you will, or a bumper sticker than it is something which is really meaningful. Remember, the conversation needs to reflect the adaptive work. It needs to really go deeper for people to really own something in the end and to move through some change. Oftentimes, there's little connection between what people may have written as a vision and what goes on every day, and no clear method to achieve it. And as you hear Virginia Mason's story, as they applied this notion of a picture of where they wanted to go together, the method really helped tremendously in moving them toward the vision, but also making that commitment to the vision extraordinarily real. So when we think about, oftentimes in America, we say when we talk about things that are kind of soft, if you will, some might call it touchy-feely, people might say, are we going to sing Kumbaya? It's very easy for doctors to put this down. It's not the hard science, but it's extraordinarily important in the alignment of the organization. And I would say the basis of shared vision, it's not as if all the doctors in the organization are totally aligned in every way. But this is just an example or a high-level way of thinking in a Venn diagram. The organization has interests and the doctors have interests. What we're looking for is the area of overlap. My experience in organizations is oftentimes the doctors and the organizational executives will talk about how we're different, where we don't align, and talk about the frustrations we have with each other. And that may well be so. But I find it very hard to believe that there aren't healthy areas of overlap in terms of commitment to patients, in terms of some economic interests, because even in countries where you are supported by taxes and so forth, still there's the issue of, are we wasting resources? Can we put our resources to better use in order to provide better care? And certainly the ability to recruit and retain the best talent of all sorts, doctors, nurses, and the rest. It's in that area of shared interests that we need to develop a shared picture of what we're all trying to accomplish together. The phrase I often like is a shared destination. What is it going to look like when we're there? And can we all put, not necessarily even exactly the same words, but when we close our eyes and we see the picture, sufficiently granular, is it something we share in common? There is tremendous power in that. And finally, I'd say it's, again, not meant to be touchy-feely. And so when we sit down to have these conversations, and it won't be just one if it's meant to be meaningful, it has to be connected to the economic realities of your organization. And sometimes doctors, I think, feel divorced from that. But somehow they've got to see that it's in their own use of resources has tremendous impact on the organization having the very things that they would like more of, be it nursing care or more doctors or better facilities. And them to see that connection between their own utilization of resources and what it is that they would like to see is extraordinarily important for them to see that connection and the connecting those dots. Certainly, I think it's got to be a stretch from what it is today. And it's got to be something more than, again, what we have is hardworking doctors, each doing their personal best, that old idea of practicing alone together. What is it in collection? And this vision, I just want to be clear, it's not just among the doctors, it's really with the executives, with the administration, management, and everybody that works in the institution. What it means in terms of behavior may be different for different people, but the picture needs to be clear and shared broadly and deeply. It's hard work, but to move through the coming to terms with that and sharing it is in itself a significant piece of adaptive work. Gary will talk a little bit now of how this is working at the M.
Thanks, Jack. So we had this urgency that's been described, and we knew that we needed a new shared vision, that we needed to engage all of our people, the entire Virginia Mason community, and in many ways starting with the doctors, because the doctors are the leaders in the organization. And if the doctors will not embrace a new shared vision, then it will be very difficult to move forward. This is actually our strategic plan. And this is, if you come to Virginia Mason to visit, you see this everywhere. Because this was the manifestation in many ways of that shared vision, particularly some elements of this plan. And this plan was developed under the direction and guidance of our community board. These are leaders from companies like Microsoft and Starbucks and Boeing and Amazon, companies that are based in Seattle. These are the leaders who provide the governance function for the Virginia Mason Health System, my boss. And the first thing this board said to us was, who is your customer? And so like everybody in healthcare, just like all of you, we said it's the patient. And the board said, time out. If that were really true, why do things look the way they do? And so we listened carefully. I was the new CEO. I was listening very carefully. And we started to study our processes. And what did we see? Is we saw that healthcare was, that things were really designed around us, not around the patient. I mean, if you think about it, what are waiting rooms? But places that we build in our facilities, these big spaces, so the patients can hurry up and be on time and then wait for us. I mean, that's what we do. We actually design it into our facilities and into our processes. Wait times. We're going to reduce wait times, but we're still going to make our patients wait. Same thing we looked at what happened in the hospital on Saturdays and Sundays. Not very much. That's because it's designed around us and around the traditions of the weekend, not around what the patients need. And so we've got very, very clear about who is the customer. And that became the focus of our shared vision, to truly put in place a system that was designed around the patient. And that was easier said than done. And we talk about patient-centeredness all the time. It's one of the IOM aims. It's one of the things you talk about in your organizations. But for us, it's been a real challenge to deeply understand what it means to put the patient first. And we are tested every single day with this because the contrary approach is so deeply ingrained in our culture in healthcare. We said, what do we aspire to be? And in many ways, that's what a vision is. It's aspirational. It's what do we aspire to be? And we said we aspire to be the quality leader. And in recent years, we've added and transformed healthcare. And what did that mean? That meant that if we could prove it, it sounds like, no-brainer, everybody wants to be the quality leader. And we said, though, if we could prove it, which we're still working on, of course, if we could prove it, why would anybody want to work anywhere else? And why would patients want to go anywhere else? And what a compelling strategy it would be. And so we said we aspire to be the quality leader. And in fact, the last 11 years has been about striving to reach our organizational vision. Now, as I mentioned, we didn't have a method, and we discovered a method, the foundation of our plan. The original plan did not have a base. But what was really interesting is as we rolled this out, as we began to talk about this in the organization, it got tremendous traction. And one of the things we did was we said we want every leader to present this the same way to their departments. And then the department heads to present this to their sections, and the sections to the individual frontline staff. We want it to be done the same way. People didn't like that. That was the beginning of thinking about standard work. They didn't like that. They wanted to put their own spin on it. I want to adapt it for my team. And what was fascinating was that the ability to do it the same way meant that everybody heard it the same way. We scripted it. And so all 5,000 people touched it the same way. However, what soon began to happen were renegade strategic plans began to appear. And at first, I thought, oh no, this is not what we wanted. But then I realized that it was really penetrating. It was really taking hold. That the Cancer Institute had their strategic plan with the patient at the top and the quality leader in cancer care and the strategies around cancer care. And then the Digestive Diseases Institute had the same strategic plan with the patient at the top and with their strategic plan to support the organizational objectives. So this was truly becoming a shared vision. It was truly becoming where we wanted and aspired to go together. And so that has been a critical, fundamental beginning of the journey for us. Jack?
I hope what's coming through in flavor is moving from kind of easy conversation about vision or some of these other complex topics where we kind of scratch the surface and we kind of hope that we all agree or we agree with a few people and assume others do. Substituting for that the deeper, meaningful conversation, taking the time to find out if there's conflict, and if so, working it through. That's what leads to the deep commitment and ultimately the engagement of people. So I think it's just as a kind of an overview to all of what we've said and will say in the remaining time, I think one of the take-homes is sometimes going slower actually leads to faster results. Because when we go over these things superficially, we don't get the deep commitment and the deep and really the deep engagement. So on to the next bubble, which is this idea of visible and committed leadership and management. And of course, in the limited time we have, I just want to touch on a couple of issues, and particularly around doctors and leadership. Because as I've observed it over the years, if you ask doctors the kinds of leaders that they most value, they'll talk about people who will advocate for them in terms of getting resources and often protect them from the things that management might want them to do. So it goes something like this. The best leader, a doctor might say, is those who go out and get us the resources and then get them, management, to leave us alone. And I think it's not all that surprising if that fits for you. It fits most places I've ever been. Because as I've often said, most doctors, when they get up in the morning, if they look for leadership, They look in the mirror. You know, they are their own leader. They're highly motivated and focused individuals. But if there's a role for leadership in that world, I think it's one who then in an organization advocates and protects from change, which many times doctors think is not really going to be to the advantage of taking care of patients. They want people who are going to communicate for them. They tell people what we need and also let us know what they're thinking. But finally, I think this was the thing that stood out in my mind early on in our exploration of this idea of leadership in doctors. You ask doctors what leaders do, and they'll talk about going to meetings, and that's fine. But in the end, that doctor leader is not 1 millimeter above. We're all basically fundamentally equal. There's no sense of accountability. There's a sense of one going out and getting that stuff for us, and we can talk about and go to meetings, but in the end, we all have the opportunity pretty much to do our own thing. And so the dynamic that really, the way that dynamic plays out, I think goes something like this. We end up with, for transformation, I do believe, and Gary will talk more about this, the physician leaders need to sponsor change. And when I talk about sponsoring change, I mean standing up, engaging people, getting ideas, but in the end saying, as the leader, I believe we need to do this, and wrapping their authority and their credibility in a change that they feel they want to promote. That's what I talk about, sponsoring change. But the dynamic, I think, is that physicians don't easily accept the legitimacy of leaders' authority. And so what we end up with is this kind of leadership caught in the middle. And when leadership does assert itself, at least in many organizations I've been in, it looks like the leader is risking their place within their own group. Because then we can get into name calling. The leader has gone to the dark side. The leader has become one of them, and so forth. So it's really extraordinarily important that we think through what are the implications, because I see people smiling out there. What are the implications of this kind of a dynamic? Why would people ever accept real leadership and sponsorship of change if it's going to be this punishing? And how do we as organizations help leaders rise to the necessary occasion and equally help everyone else who's not in those official leadership roles to recognize the benefits of having effective leadership? Because it's only through effective leadership that individual doctors get to truly have influence in the organization. My experience is as individuals, doctors don't have much influence. It's through their collective thinking and organizing and presenting points of view, which really represent the best thinking of the group, that they have influence. And truly, when they can present that kind of thinking as well as make and keep commitments collectively, that then they are a true partner in the organization with lots of influence. And so I think that's the dynamic that needs to really be developed over time. So just with a closing thought around this leadership, Ed Schein, who many of you may know, is kind of really one of the seminal thinkers around organizational culture in America. He's now emeritus from MIT. He talks about there is a culture, the culture actually defines leadership in all of our organizations. And he says that organizations at some point recognize that they're in trouble, that the old ways of working, which were very successful, and the old ways of leading, which were very successful, are now not producing the results. And then he says, leadership now at a point like this, at this inflection point, is the ability to step outside the culture that created the leader to start evolutionary change processes that are more adaptive. Leadership for tomorrow will not be understood by looking out to the past. That worked very well in the past. But now we need to start evolutionary processes, redefining what it is for leaders to lead and to sponsor change. And Gary's going to share with you, I think, some really revolutionary ideas of what they've been doing to develop the kind of leadership that I think has really propelled them to such great results.
So this concept is particularly poignant for me because I've been at Virginia Mason Medical Center for 33 years, and I've been a leader for much of that time. But it wasn't until I became the CEO that I really realized that I needed to step out of the culture, and that was very hard to do. And it's both an advantage and a disadvantage that I have come from that culture. But we got really clear in recent years that being a physician leader is a critical success factor. It's a fundamental prerequisite in an organization like ours, and I think in most healthcare organizations, to moving forward. It's a real job. It's not something we do in our spare time. It's not something we do on weekends and evenings, but it's a real job. It's a job that is appointed, and in fact, the criteria of physician leaders, it used to be the leader with the most academic standing, or the most seniority, or the person who'd written the most papers, or the person who wasn't in the room when the leader was chosen. They were the ones that became the leader. But today, it's a real job with a real set of skills and aptitudes and job expectations. We have job descriptions for all of our physician leaders, for our department chiefs, for our medical directors, for our section heads. We have expectations and deliverables and goals that are critical on an annual basis that support the strategic plan. We have a very rich and robust culture of feedback. And that's something that is very underdeveloped in healthcare organizations. I want to ask you, how many people here who have physicians in your organizations actually provide 360-degree feedback on a regular basis to your doctors, to your physicians? That's really good to see, because if I asked this question 5 years ago or 10 years ago, there would probably be no hands that go up. And so what we say is feedback is part of accountability, and that we cannot achieve what we're trying to achieve unless we have a very rich culture of feedback. And the role of the physician leader in both giving and receiving feedback is critical. We invest in training and development. So we say if leadership's a real job, you don't just kind of learn it on the fly as a physician leader. You didn't learn it, we certainly didn't learn it in medical school. So we say we want to invest. We want to invest in leaders, we want to invest in young leaders, and people who will continue to develop. And so we invest in talent development and succession planning. And in fact, this past month, we have begun engaged in a process of talent development, talent reviews, like are used in other industries, for all of our physician leaders in the organization. And it's very, very powerful. I think it's important to keep in mind as we talk about physician leaders that everyone changes, not just the physicians and the physician leaders who have to change their mindset. Our administrative colleagues. In the United States, there's a whole culture of hospital CEOs that basically have said, the physicians are an important customer. I rely on physicians to fill my beds, but I'm going to keep them over there. I'm not going to focus on those intersecting interests that Jack described when he talked about shared vision. But in fact, I think success requires everyone to change, and it requires adaptive change for our administrative colleagues. Now there's the dichotomy is usually the physicians, their clinical quality improvement, they care about what happens to the patients, and the administrators, they're the bean counters, they're the financial people, they manage the money. But in reality, we all are accountable for everything. And that's how it works at Virginia Mason. We have true team leadership. So the physicians are also accountable for economic performance. And the administrators are also accountable for quality and safety. And in fact, if I was an administrator, there would have been easier industries to go into to make a living than healthcare. But our administrators, and many of you in this room who are not clinicians, went into healthcare because you wanted to be in the healing professions. You wanted to make a difference for people. And so we need to understand that everybody needs to change. And we need to move away from we will just impose or roll out, or we have to go get this group's buy-in, to we're all in this together. And we need to help build the will and the competencies and the capacity for change together. And that means engagement. And engaging clinicians is critical. Engaging clinicians because we need their ideas. In fact, we need everybody's ideas. I say to our 5,000 people, we need your best thinking. This work is too hard and too complex to not have your best thinking, to not have your engagement. And it's critically important for our physicians. Not only do we get their best thinking, but then they own the solutions. And it's really a critical way to get them involved in the change that they need to be part of making happen. Physician leadership, critically important as we go forward.
So to come to the kind of full cycle here, I want to spend just a moment defining that last bubble, and then Gary will give some examples of how it's been applied. This notion of a new compact that aligns expectations with achieving the vision, this shared picture. Well, the notion of a compact, this concept, I think, was first applied, Mary Jane and myself were searching as consultants for many years for some way of really getting lift in helping doctors really readjust their expectations in organizations. Because it seemed, through all our years of our consulting practice, each change was kind of tumultuous. And we were searching for a way of kind of saying, but it's fundamentally different what we're asking doctors to think about in terms of organization. And about 10 years ago, we came across this concept that was actually first noticed or described in the 1960s by Ed Schein and others. And it's this notion of this organization compact, or sometimes referred to as a psychological contract. And it's just a natural phenomenon that happens in organizations. There are expectations which are often never written down or made explicit, but are commonly understood in an organization of what is it to be in this organization, what do I give, and what do I expect in return. And that deal, when it feels fair and equal, builds very successful relationships. And when it's aligned, when that give and get is aligned with what it takes for organizational success, it supports that success. The problem is when those compacts at one time supported success, and when the world changes and it doesn't support success, how do we then readjust the compact? So in America, and I suspect there are some countries represented here who also can relate to this, not so much in healthcare, but in most industries in America, up until, say, the mid to late 1980s, the unwritten but common understanding when you worked for a company was loyalty for job security. If I'm loyal to the company, I will have a job for life. And that built very successful organizations until America faced severe international competition, particularly from Japan in the mid to late 1980s. And that deal of loyalty for job security meant nothing. And we massive layoffs because now suddenly we had to really think about waste. We had to think about performance-based compacts. And people felt violated. People felt betrayed by that change in an understanding that they had really devoted their whole life and committed their life to. Well, what about compacts in healthcare? And our observation is, at least in all the countries and organizations we've worked in, there has been an unstated but common understanding for doctors. And that is, you come to our organization, we expect you to treat patients and basically be a good doctor, provide quality care, but it tends to be professionally or personally defined traditionally. There weren't ways of really, still one could argue whether we have perfect ways of measuring, but certainly more than we had in the days in which this compact, I think, became understood. So you treat patients and be a good doctor, however we define that. And what you get in return in this reciprocal agreement are three things that I think are very tightly connected to one's expectations of being a doctor or a professional. Autonomy, you join this organization, no one will tell you how to practice, you get to do whatever you think is best for your patients. Protection, we can protect you from change to some extent, we can certainly protect you from the economic realities, the day-to-day management, the hiring and the firing of people. We just expect you to devote yourself completely to doing what's best for your patients. And certain entitlements, that meaning things due you which perhaps don't relate to how you behave or even how the organization performs, but they're kind of promises we make, entitlements. And it might be certain things about money, it might be certain things about parking places, it might be certain ways in which we tolerate behavior from you that we wouldn't take from others. None of this is meant to be critical. And in fact, I think this compact, if you can connect to it, builds very successful organizations all around the world. And it also reflected what society was promising, which oftentimes when we went to medical school, it was you go to medical school and in the end, no one will tell you what to do. You'll be an autonomous professional. You'll never really have to worry about making a living. From that perspective, you'll be protected and you'll be entitled, if nothing else, and there's probably going to be a lot more, but you'll be entitled to the respect of your patients. So it was a societal promise as well as kind of in an organizational level. And I think that's what organizations often promise to recruit and retain the best talent. But now we find ourselves in a bit of a bind Because you think about that set of legacy expectations or traditional promise of autonomy, protection, and entitlement, and now we are faced with these imperatives. And the list is, I think, your list may be slightly different, but everywhere I go, they include the elements that are up there around quality and safety and electronic records and all the things that are up there. And I find it very hard to imagine how one can make significant progress with those imperatives if the doctors are still thinking about comparing what they're being asked to do to the old deal. Particularly when the old deal or the old compact was very real and they lived it and enjoyed it for many years. And we're taught to expect it in the socialization they experienced in medical school. And so I want to make it clear, not every doctor in your organization may feel this way. There may well be young doctors who are wondering what the older doctors or more senior doctors are upset about. But I suspect that if there are doctors in your organization that are reflecting this kind of thinking, this is not the organization I joined. This is not the profession I chose to be a part of. If that's the kind of the sense that you get, I think what people are really expressing to you is this disconnection between the old deal, which they experienced for a long time, and the new expectations or the new imperatives. And what we've done, I think, in most of our organizations, as we have made progress on those issues, not by kind of necessarily sitting down, as we'll talk about, and renegotiating a set of expectations which are aligned with the future, but rather chipping away at the old. And so what I think doctors have been left with in many organizations is a shadow of what they once had that was highly valued, and no sense of what will be to replace something like that really resonated for them, and therefore feel oftentimes alienated and distrustful of this kind of change. And so the thing that we're talking about is really thinking about if you can connect to this old deal crumbling, and I don't see how it could really be maintained, then I think it's about having conversation, because without it, what we have is alienation and frustration. And it's about dialoguing, but deeply dialoguing, not superficially and not a one-time conversation, but really understanding why the old deal is not possible and what's the new deal. But the new deal of what we give, doctors give, what the organization gives in return, that will facilitate getting to that destination that we all said we wanted to get to. Now, you see the reset button there. I think it's oftentimes important to begin with leaders, because thinking about, kind of what are we going to be willing to give and to get to that shared destination. But the second line I want to call attention to, the journey is as important as the destination. It sounds like a kind of a trite thing to say, but that conversation and its depth and listening is extremely important, because please do remember what I said about adaptive change. It's about that give and take that helps people let go of what they once thought they could not live without, and then they can begin to use that energy to help create the deal for the future. It's never ceased to amaze me what the therapeutic aspects of those kinds of deep conversations to really get people to move toward a future. It's an iterative process. It's not one conversation. And this is a great example of where now it's not just the doctors that are accountable, but you'll see it's a two-way street, as Gary will describe it to you. It's what are the doctors accountable for to management, what's management accountable for to the doctors. So just in summary, if our shared vision, the strategic vision, is a function of what society needs of us and our local market and the competition and our strengths, whatever it would be so in your situation, we develop this strategic vision or this shared destination or picture. What the physicians give are the few things that consistently done will really, really move us toward that picture. And what the organization gives largely are those things that it can give that will facilitate the physicians to keep those commitments, to help them be successful and moving the organization toward its destination. So, Gary, you could talk a little bit about how it's been applied.
Well, as we get ready to wrap up, we thought that this alignment of expectations is so critically important to the work. We don't want to underestimate how important it is. And so we were on this journey. We had this urgency. We had this new strategic plan. But we continued to have predominantly a physician-centered view of the world. And this was the deal. This was the old compact. It was not written down anywhere, but it was the deal when I joined Virginia Mason. And it was still the deal in the year 2000. And in most of healthcare organizations today, it's still the deal. And I remember my father saying, go into medicine. You can write your own ticket. Even if you work in an organization, you will be your own boss because you're a professional. And so I was entitled to patients because I joined a good organization with a reputation and been around for 80 years. I was protected because there were great administrators and business people and physician leaders like I became. And I was autonomous. I could do anything I wanted. I was a professional, and only I knew what was best for my patients. And it was a very sweet deal. I thought it was wonderful. Except it was not the deal that would allow us to move forward into the future where we needed to go as a healthcare organization. And we began to see this. And so in November of 2000, soon after I became CEO, we had a physician retreat where all of our physicians, we had several hundred physicians, we went away for the weekend. We actually had Jack, we barely knew each other, but we knew of each other's work, and Jack came and helped facilitate this retreat. And the retreat was about mourning for the past. We didn't really know that's what it would be about, but that's what it was about. There were tears that were shed over this weekend of talking about how wonderful the past was, but how we couldn't go forward with maintaining much of what we had stood for in the past. Coming out of the retreat, we said we want and need a new compact. And so I appointed a committee. The committee was led by a frontline physician. She was very reluctant to take on this responsibility. She now is a fabulous leader, but she was a frontline physician. And we appointed a committee of other frontline physicians to lead this work. They insisted that I be part of the group, and because it was actually a reciprocal agreement that was necessary. The doctors could put down their wish list, but if the organization was not able to provide that, then it was not a reciprocal understanding. And vice versa. The organization could have our expectations, but unless it was an agreed upon reciprocal agreement. And so this process, what was described as a deep conversation, took place over many, many months and more than a year's period, and many drafts. And it touched every single physician in the organization. It was quite a remarkable process. It went to department meetings. There was role playing, describing things. And this is our compact. And I don't expect you to read this. And really the words on this page are not nearly as important as the process that we went through. But as you can see, organization's responsibilities, what every doctor has every right to expect from their organization, and the physician's responsibilities, what the organization has every right to expect from its doctors. And you can see the categories, listen and communicate, foster excellence, reward, lead with integrity, educate. And the physician responsibilities, be a member of a team, collaborate, treat people with respect. And my favorite one, implement Virginia Mason accepted standards of care. Meaning if we as a group of physicians come together, say this is the evidence-based best practice, we're going to deliver that to every patient every time until we develop a new best practice. But think about healthcare. What do? Guidelines. This is the best practice. This is the evidence. But it's just a guideline. You don't have to do it. And the patients don't know that. They think they're getting the evidence-based best practice every time. And so it's not to say that there aren't reasons to deviate from a pathway with exceptions when necessary. But this was important. And so we got very, very clear about the reciprocal expectations. And today, this is foundational. We would never have been able to put in place the Virginia Mason production system. We would never have been able to move this where it's gone in the last 10 years without a shared vision, without urgency, a shared vision, without leadership, and without aligned expectations in our compact. And the compact supports our vision. We revisit it all the time. We talk about it constantly. And we've hardwired it. We've hardwired it into recruitment. So when a physician says, I want to apply for a job at Virginia Mason, they get a letter from me. Thank you very much for your interest. We'll look forward to meeting you. Here's a copy of our physician compact. 95% say this is really good. And about 5% say, you know, I don't want to work in a place that's that clear. And that is really good because people understand that up front. And it's a screening mechanism. We use it in our performance reviews, our performance feedback. And I am held accountable for the organization's responsibilities in maintaining those, just as we hold our physicians accountable for their responsibilities as well.
I think I want to elect just to say a couple of closing words that this slide is there and you can read it as I'm speaking, but I think what I really wanted to focus on is really kind of the larger picture in the minute or two that I have left, and ask you to think about the framework that we had up there, and what was above the line was the method. And I think the method that Gary's described, and whatever method you're using, but certainly it seems that the method that Gary described is extraordinarily powerful. And I think many of us can become enamored with technical. Remember, so often we prefer the technical fix. And I think it's great, and we need to have it or we won't make progress. But if I had one plea for you all, is to really reflect honestly on how rapid your improvement has been overall in the organization, not just individual projects, but what's the depth of penetration the ideas have gotten. How has there been maintenance or lack thereof of improvements that you've made? How much initiation or curiosity is there among other members of staff to really improve the quality of care that's provided in their daily work? And if you sense that perhaps it needs more energy, I'd ask you to focus your energy or your thinking as a leader below the line and think about where are you with urgency? And if people are lacking that sense of urgency that you feel, again, what is it you know they don't, and how can you get them to feel what it is that you understand by connecting the dots or exposing them to information they heretofore maybe have not really felt in a way that's been compelling? And then I ask you to think about this vision. You may have one on the wall, but how deeply is it shared? And do you use it to guide decisions in the organization on a day-to-day basis, and what you measure as important? And what kind of leadership do you have? And have you really invested in the kind of physician leadership that has the courage and the capacity to lead people to a place they might not otherwise choose, but over time will truly get behind with enough dialogue and support? And then finally, have we clarified the expectations? Because I think there is nothing more alienating to doctors in an organization than to feel that an old deal that was kept and was valued has been shipped away without any sense of what the new deal is to replace it. And yet they're expected to put on a smile, see patients, and to contribute to this ongoing improvement of care, when some aspects of what they're being asked to do really do chip away in significant ways of what was once theirs. And now we need to define a new one, modernize it, if you will, and then hold each other to account. I hope those are kind of good levers or ways of footholds, if you will, for you to think about making improvements in the acceleration of progress in improving care in your organizations. Thanks very much. Gary.
Yes, so just to reinforce that, as leaders, I think we have to make this work both an affair of the head and an affair of the heart. We have to capture the hearts and the minds of our people. It's about surrounding great people with great systems, and it's about the shared vision and where we want to go together. And this is a quote from our sensei, Mr. Nakao. Mr. Nakao is one of only 2 living students of Taiichi Ohno, who discovered the Toyota production system. And he told us, if you're dreaming about it, you can do it. And so what I work hard at, and what we work hard at Virginia Mason, is keeping that dream in front of people. Our dream is that we can transform an organization, and in so doing, help to transform an industry. It's a dream that's powerful, and it's a dream that's hard work, but I hope you'll agree that it's all worthwhile. And so we wish you the best of luck as you continue your journey. We hope this has been helpful to you. Thanks very much. Thank you. Nice job.
You did it. That's good.